It is one thing to punish someone in order to make them realize that they have made a mistake. However, it is an entirely different thing to torture someone to the point that they hope they will be dead. The methods of torture that have been developed over the course of centuries in order to coerce criminals into confessing their crimes have been widely used in this cruel society. Despite the fact that some may have been discontinued, there are still others that may be found on the shadowy side of this cruel planet. Take a look at the top 10 most brutal methods of torture that have ever been developed. Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new video on the channel. Today we are going to talk about top 10 scariest torture devices ever invented. Before we get started with the video, don't forget to smash the like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. Number 10. Heretic's Fork. During the Middle Ages, this torture tool became well known during the Spanish Inquisition. It had a collar with 2 prongs on it. The user had to keep their head back to prevent being stabbed through the upper chest or lower jaw due to the sharp edges of the tool. Although the fork was not intended to kill the victim of torture, it would have inflicted excruciating pain if they had loosened their head. Number 9. Thumbscrew. The thumbscrew is widely considered to be one of the most notorious examples of torture devices that originated in medieval Europe. Through the turning of a screw, the device applied pressure to the victim's fingers or thumbs, as the name of the device indicated. Typically made of metal, these devices featured compartments that allowed for the crushing of 2 digits at the same time. Number 8. Scold's Bridle. This European torture device from the 16th and 17th centuries was designed to humiliate the sufferer in addition to causing physical suffering. During this time period, the term scold was used to designate women, and occasionally males, who engaged in societally inappropriate activities such as fighting, gossiping, and speaking out of turn. These out-of-control people were occasionally punished by having to wear a metal bridle on their heads in public. Some variants of the device had a spiked bit that dug into the wearer's mouth and prevented them from speaking. Number 7. Spanish Tickler. While it may not appear to be a torture device, the Spanish tickler had nothing to do with tickling. It was a very sharp claw-like tool that the torturer would hold in their hand and use pressure on the skin to rend the flesh from the tortured one. Torture like this is usually done in public, and the torturer takes his time scaring the victim inch by inch. The Spanish tickler was sometimes used with other torture methods such as racking, pulling a person apart to the point where limbs broke, and rat torture. Because of the excruciating pain, most people who endure the Spanish tickler procedure do not live to see another day. Consider yourself to have lengthy and deep wounds all over your body. That had to be a terrible way to go, but wait until you get to the end of this essay. Number 6. Flaying alive. Flaying alive, or to put it another way, skinning individuals while they are still alive, is a form of torture that has been compared to the blood eagle. Indeed, you did hear me correctly. The tormentors would make a number of long cuts around the body before pulling it apart and separating the muscles from the skin. People would not perish instantly, but they may live for days like that without any skin on their bodies. This is the most terrible aspect of the situation. In most cases, they were skinned and chained up outside, where they were exposed to the elements, tiny animals, birds, insects, and humans who would further torture them by hurling rocks or other similar objects at them. At some point in time, they would pass away due to obvious causes such as infection and blood pressure. Each and every one of their bodies would become a single enormous wound. Number 5. Breaking wheel. The breaking wheel is a massive wooden wheel that the person who is being punished would be tied down to, and then they would be violently beaten with heavy things. There were instances when those wheels were positioned vertically on a spinning system, and fire would be ignited underneath them. This was done so that the person being tortured would be burned for a brief period of time whenever the wheel was spun by the person using the device. Sometimes, after beating the person who is being punished with a heavy wooden stick on the wheel, they would position the wheel vertically atop towering wooden tower-like constructions and then leave it to die in the sun. Additionally, in order to inflict even more anguish on the person who is being punished, they would untie damaged limbs and then tie them back up in the most unnatural ways possible. A person would not necessarily die as a result of the breaking wheel method. Instead, they were destined to die as a result of the pain, infection, and general weariness that they experienced after being subjected to such torture. Number 4. The Judas Cradle. The Judas Cradle was designed to humiliate and torment victims by gently impaling them. It was built for this purpose. First, the uppermost point of the pyramid that makes up the Judas Cradle would be put into the victim's private portion, which is typically the anus. After that, the victim would be gradually lowered down the pyramid, which would result in the victim's rear end being gradually torn at an angle. The victim would be lowered even more, which would result in the tip of the weapon penetrating the organs and impaling the individual. Due to the fact that it was used to slowly tear open the victim's intimate parts, piece through their organs, and finally impale them. Number 3. Rat torture. Try to picture yourself confined in a cell with rats surrounding you on all sides. Isn't that a form of torture in and of itself? It would appear that this was not sufficient throughout the medieval era. In order to carry out this method, a cage with one side open was secured to the body of the victim. Following that, it would be stuffed with huge rats, and a heating element would be positioned on the opposite side of the cage. Furthermore, because the rodents would attempt to escape the great heat, they would dig through the body of the victim, which would ultimately result in their death. Number 2. The rack. It is highly possible that the rack is the only medieval torture device that you are familiar with. Due to the fact that the Duke of Exeter was the one who brought the device to the Tower of London in the 15th century, it became known as the Duke of Exeter's daughter. The victims were forced to have their hands and feet bound with ropes while they were lying down on the surface that resembled a table. The victims' limbs were stretched in opposite directions as the rollers were spun, which occurred when the ropes were attached to the rollers. Because of the stress, their muscle ligaments were finely torn, and their arms and legs were dislocated, making it a straightforward method of torture that was still effective. Number 1. Brazen Bull. Your inventiveness is rewarded with points for this twisted contraption. According to the ancient Greek author Diodorus Siculus' historical account, the craftsman Perilos created the brazen bull for the Greek dictator Phalaris in the 6th century BCE. The structure was made of hollow bronze and had the shape of a bull. It had a door that allowed victims to be inserted. The victim was then roasted alive by a fire that was lit under the bull after it had been loaded with ammunition. The particulars of the apparatus were the ones that created the most unsettling feelings. The screams of the victims were made to sound like the roar of a bull, thanks to the pipes that were installed in the mouth of the statue for this purpose. Imagining that such a horrible device ever existed is difficult, and there is a possibility that it never did exist in the first place. Several contemporary academics are of the opinion that Diodorus Siculus' story was, at the very least, exaggerated and maybe even manufactured. That's a wrap on the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.